record to this computer, yeah. If pet type right here was equal to house at, and then we could have run some logic. And then we'd also have to do else if, you know, pet dot type was equal to domesticated, right? Domesticated, and then run additional logic, right? That's a lot of additional code. This just gets ugly after a while. Now we could have said, you know, if pet type is that, or pet type is, we could have done that also, use the or operator to match both of those conditions. And then right here, we got rid of this additional else if. But once again, at the same time, this just requires all this additional typing when I could get rid of like pet type and equals and just say case. Case has matched this condition. That's it. So this would have worked to match these two conditions, and then I would have had to create an else if and done the same thing for wild animal and wild beast, right? A lot of the times I may opt for this sometimes just because I don't work with switches too often, not the thing I kind of work with on a regular basis. A lot of the times I'm doing conditional logic. Most of the time, a ternary between one or two is a true or false, right? That's the predominant one that I really use, especially in React. And then if statements just to match one or two or three very unique conditions. I know I'm looking for something very specific. And rarely do I fall into this spectrum of like, maybe it's a few of these things, okay? But it could happen, and if it does, that would be the case. Then you could use a switch statement, okay? The next one to cover is reduce, array.reduce. And it looks like the majority, I think the majority of us, yep. Yeah, at least, yeah, majority haven't worked with reduce. Now, I did mention when it comes to the array methods that you should know, you should learn, right? Dot for each, which I just used, dot map, which we use all the time in React, right? Dot filter, and then the last one is dot reduce. Like these four magic methods are awesome for looping constructs versus things like, you know, I don't know, dot includes something like where you're looking to see if the thing is there and it returns true or false if it finds the thing, which is kind of, I guess, kind of similar to filter, but filter returns the array of things that meets the condition and includes just like if it includes it. So those are the four. So when it comes to array.reduce, the idea of reducing this array into what we're going to try to do is reduce it down to a single thing, right? I mean, what reduce sounds like, right? Taking a large number of things and kind of reducing it in size. So say we wanted to get the sum of this array, right? The sum of the array. In the past, if somebody was trying to like do that, they might have said, oh, I'll just do like const, I don't know, sum is equal to, I don't know, nums, the first one in there. And then I could have looped over, I could have done nums dot for each, d, and then just a sum plus equals d, okay? Sum, and then if I console log, sum here, we should see that sum contains, I'm just going to stop this from running here because that doesn't run, okay? If I do this, oh, assignment, nums dot for each, what did I do here? Sum, nums, d should have been the number, right?
It shouldn't be a const. You're changing
oh, because we're changing it, yeah, we're changing it. There we go, all right. There we go. So total of 16, right? Okay. So that would have been the old way of doing it, where if you didn't know reduce, you're like, oh, I'm going to create this variable, do the thing, add it to the thing. That works easy enough. So we don't want to really do this anymore. We want to use reduce, okay? So to use reduce, what we would do is do nums. I'm going to say let sum equal to nums dot reduce. Okay, that's the method. Now the method takes in a callback. And I'm going to put two things in here, and those two things are going to be very specific to reduce. Now, the first one is going to be the accumulator, and I'm just going to abbreviate it as ACC, the accumulator, maybe a accumulator. And the other one is going to be the element. Okay, and we know that I always use D for the element, but here I'll call it the element, whatever it is in the array. Okay, so the accumulator is that thing, what sum was up here, right? Sum was equal to a number, and so the accumulator becomes the thing by which we reduce the other values and use it to accumulate those other elements. Now, setting the accumulator, I'm going to go down here with the reduce method. Besides taking this callback as the first parameter, it takes in a value that you can assign to the accumulator. So I can say 0 for the accumulator. So the accumulator right now is the same as me. Well, it's not the same here because I set it to the first number, but it would be the same as me doing this right here, 0. Okay, sum is 0, and then I'm adding. So I'm assigning the accumulator to the value of 0, and then element will be each one of those elements as they come in. So now I want to do the same thing. I want to reduce all of these numbers and get a sum. So what we can do is say, so now that we have the accumulator, we can say the accumulator, we could return the accum plus equals the element, okay? And what we're doing, the internal workings of this is it's going to return the accumulator number plus this, and then the accumulator becomes or turns itself into this value. The sum of this value is what the next turn of accumulator becomes, okay? So let's run this. Let me just console log, right, sum, and let's see if that works. Okay, so now it works, okay? So here what we're doing is doing what we were doing here before, except now we're doing it using the reduce method. And it's just a great way to reduce things down to size. So now, instead of doing these where I split this up, it's kind of this self-contained element. Yeah, that's really reduce. Any kind of questions on reduce? We're going to see this format when we do useReducer. So the minute we start working with useReducer, you're going to see that we are going to do this kind of construct, this callback as a argument and some sort of starting value. Okay. Yeah.
Would this have worked if you had set sum to a const as well?
Oh, set this? I don't know. Let me see. Yep, that would work. Because we're not redefining const. Like this thing runs first. It's doing, and then when it's done, it returns back a single number, right? And so reduce doesn't necessarily return an array. Like these two return arrays. For each returns nothing. Reduce returns whatever it was that was inside of here. Whatever this value was, if it was an array, it would return an array, okay? If we wanted to like create a new array and push things, we could have done that too. We could use this to, you know, multiply each number by 2 and return a brand new array where each number is multiplied by 2. We could have done that also. It's another supplement to using a map to do the same thing, okay? So that's reduce. Feeling good with reduce, right? Not too complicated. Just another one that, and in all honesty, there's times I default to using map more times than using reduce, just because map is just something I'm always familiar with doing, and I don't use reduce. But say we wanted to take reduce and maybe multiply those numbers by 2, right? So if we wanted to multiply the number by 2, we could say maybe, I don't know, let num equal to element times 2, right? So now num is it. I could say accum dot push num. Now here, I have to change this from 0 to be an array because now we're pushing something, right? I'm going to get rid of this, and I am going to return vacuum. Let me see if this works. Hopefully this works. Right, there we go. So you don't always have to return a single value. You can return the same array mutated. This would have been a perfect use case just for using map, right? Map returns the array. That's why I don't necessarily use this as often. Usually I want to mutate something, return back the whole array mutated. I don't usually opt to walk down this row. Okay, so I'm just going to reverse it, go back to what it was to our use case here. Okay, sweet. All right, rounds, awesome. That was switch and array.reduce. Okay, so let's get into the useReducer hook. Now, as part of the homework, before I open that up, part of the homework, I did assign some reading. I always assign some reading. I don't know if everyone does the reading. I put it there to give you kind of some heads up of what's going to happen in the next class, expose you to other things. Both of these, one is the React Docs, and the other is this Dave Sedia, who writes a lot of really cool articles. I would suggest reading his articles on hooks. And so, useReducer, I'm just going to take a look at his article because it just brings some of those points I want to mention, right? So it seems like this particular hook, he feels, is poised to be the most on fire, and because it's providing some of the functionality that Redux provides. Okay. So Redux was providing what we're now getting. Redux was providing a little bit of providing context, right? The context API that we learned last week, and useReducer. And so they kind of extrapolated that functionality, and now React has it. Redux is still a very, very powerful tool and should be considered for larger apps. But for smaller apps, maybe you don't need Redux, and now you have these additional tools. Okay. Just going to go down here. So what Reducer is kind of a reducer, and that's kind of what we did. And that's why I wanted to go over the reduce method, because it is about reducing things, right? So you have many things. You want to combine those things into a certain single value, right? Reduce is what we were going to use, right? And then as it turns into a reducer, I just want to show it to you. We're going to jump into coding this any minute. But here's a reducer, right? Now, the reducer looks almost identical, right, to the reduce method. Here's the reduce, takes in a callback, right? And then it takes in whatever starting value you want. And this useReducer is also almost identical. It's almost identical to that. The only other change now here is, watch this. What does this look like? This construct just like this. Say we just had something like this alone and not the callback. What does that look like of the hooks that we learned? Anybody?
Set state?
Use state.
Use state.
Use state, right? So this looks very similar to use state. So useReducer is kind of like the cracked up version of use state. It's going to allow you to do a few things more and aggregate some of your business logic, those methods that are like calculating things and then pushing it into state. useReducer could do just that. All right. So let's jump in and start working with useReducer. Here's our code along. Bloop, bloop. And I just slacked out a little code along that we'll build here. Okay, so say we had a counter, right? Excuse me. And we wanted to count. So obviously, if I want to count, I'm going to need some sort of button. This is going to be a really basic demo here. I'm going to add a button. And actually, before we add the button, let's do this. Right now, I'm hard coding this to be 0, right? If I do 10, it'll be 10 also, right? Let me just zoom in a little bit here. Okay. So if we want to use the reducer hook, Well, the first thing we need to do is import it, right? useReducer. That's the first and foremost, most important thing that we need to do to use the new hook. Okay. Well, using the hook means that we need to create those variables. So I'm going to say const, and this is similar to useState. So I'm going to say maybe, I don't know, sum, and then I'm going to give it a function name to run. Just like if this was something like sum and set sum. Something like that, right? So sum and set sum, that's what we would have done if this was useState. So I'm going to say sum and then set sum, and then we'll say useReducer, and then useReducer is going to take in a callback, okay? And it's going to have a starting value. So I'll say 0 as our starting value, and then the callback here, it's going to take 2 values. Very similar to the reduce method, except they swap it. So in useReduce, I'm going to call this state, and I'm going to call this, I don't know, no. Okay? So what happens here is this. Sum, let's put some notes here. Sum is the actual value in state, right? That's the value that we're going to be monitoring. That's our new state value, okay? This is the actual, here I'm going to actually put state value, okay? Changes to state, cause a re-render, right? This hasn't changed anything. So now that we're doing that, and set sum, in this instance, set sum is the method, okay? That will run some logic, right? That mutates or that maybe updates state, right? Okay. And in this instance, state is really the sum value, okay? This becomes our state, and this just becomes a parameter that we're calling state, right? Or an argument that we're calling state. It really represents sum at this moment. The two are identical. And then set sum is this whole method. This whole callback is going to be set sum. Okay? So here we go. So I'm going to go down here and say, all right, first things first, I would like to set this value to be sum, right? And it's 0. And let's just say if I change it to be 10, look, it changes, okay? So now we have multiple values that any value that we put here becomes our starting value. Okay. So when we do the count, now this is really, really basic what we're doing here. And I'll start with something basic, and then we'll do where we increment the counter. So let's let me add another button. So, or add a button, right? I haven't added a button. And let's do something called increment, right? Okay, so I have a button that's increment, and of course, we want a button that's gonna be decrement. Okay, so decrement, increment. And the intent is to click on this increment and increase count, decrement decreases count, easy enough. So in the past, what we would have done here is, and we're still going to do it. We're doing an on-click, right? On-click method, and that on-click is going to do something, right? And so that on-click is going to call set sum, okay? And when we call set sum, well, we need to pass it a value. Now, because we're using increment here, and decrement, the value that I'm going to tell it is to add. Okay, and I'm going to do the same with this. I'm going to say on click is equal to set sum and sub. So add and sub. Okay, I don't have to pass it a value. We know that we're adding by 1 at this point in time, but I'm going to pass it these 2 values. Okay, so if I go in here now and we just take a look and see, I'm going to console log. Now let's just, while we're in here, say, you know, this is use reducer, and let's say that this is state and this is null. Okay. Now maybe this isn't. This should have been. I'm going to call this action. Yeah, I'm going to call it action because we're doing something. We're doing a specific action. So now if I run this, I'm going to open this up. Window. We'll do this. Got no errors here. Awesome. Zoom in a little bit. Increment. Look, this is useReducer 10 and add and then decrement. So useReducer undefined sub. Okay, so we got to take a look at that, right? Now useReducer is undefined. Okay, let's go back and see what's happening. Oh, because I'm just console logging. I have to return something. That's key. I have to return something. And it's no different than in this REPL. In this REPL, I returned something here. Now, in the REPL, if I didn't use the return keyword, does anyone know what would happen? So I'm going to go up here, and I'm just going to comment this out. Say I don't use a return keyword here, and I just say console.log. Okay. What if I console log this? I removed the return keyword, and I run this. Oh, I got to run this, right? Boop, boop, boop. Let's see what happens. Dog is suitable. Dog not sure is suitable. Lion is suitable. Cat is suitable. Is suitable. Is suitable. It should blast pass and say not sure. Right, cat. So I'm getting not sure it's suitable for cat. When we knew cat is a domesticated animal, and it should be, right? Boar is not suitable. Rabble is suitable. What's happening here is when you do console log, this goes through the list and it just keeps going. It'll match these conditions as well. In order to stop the case from running, we need to do one or two things, either add a return or add a break. If I add a break statement here, oh, you know why? Because I'm console logging this, that's why. Let me do this. I'm going to get rid of the console log here so we don't see that. Now let me run it. Okay. So dog is suitable, cat is suitable, rabbit is suitable. And they're all going through. And I think we should have seen like, well, they should have went down here.
You returned on the wild animal and your default, and that's why instead of console logging, that's why.
Oh, not sure. Got it. So I'm going to console log this. Let me see, console log that also, right? Let me see. Okay. There's a lot of console logs here. And so we don't, right? Not sure, right? But not sure if it's suitable, not sure what type of animal is this. Are we not seeing that? Not sure if it's suitable. Dog is suitable for your home, right? Dog is suitable. And then we should immediately say dog not suitable. You see this where it's doubling up? Dog is suitable for your home, but not sure dog is suitable, right? We're seeing it twice. That doesn't make any sense. That's because this case is matched and it runs this and then it keeps going down to see if it matches this or this, and then it'll run because it did match one of these conditions. Just so happens this is running also. Okay. Without this break here or a return statement, this thing should, yeah, now it runs, right? Dog is suitable, then lion. We only see dog run once because this runs and then we break out of the condition and then we run through it again. Without a break or a return, these conditions keep running. So I wanted to show you that because what we need to do now, and the reason why we're not seeing here like reducer undefined, because we're not returning anything, okay? So now that we know what that is, let's do our switch statement. Switch, okay? So what are we gonna be matching here? Well, we're gonna be taking a look at the action. So this set sum is really kind of this whole callback, except it is only really listening for the action. It has access to state, it doesn't need it. So the switch statement inside of here, we're really just kind of monitoring the action. So I am going to say for the switch, here's our case. What's our case? Add. That's what we want to do. We also want to subtract, but let's just start with add. If I do an add, what are we going to do? We're going to return sum or state plus equals 1. Okay? Now it's screaming at me, and what it's saying is it expects a default case, right? So if it's not something, well, then we should tell it to do something, right? And just let's say for the default case, I will just say return, I don't know, we'll start with 0. If we give it anything else but that, it'll return 0. So let's take a look now. Let's see if I do increment. Look, see how it's incrementing? Value is going up. Now if I decrement, what happened? Man, I just lost all of my values that I was counting. Well, because when we put it through, right? I'll go back here. Let's take a look. I'm going to refresh this. Okay, so here we go. I increment, the value goes up. Watch, useReducer 11, 12. It's going. Now, when I decrement, boop, it goes to 0. And now we know that we passed in sub, but the value is 0, right? If I decrement again, look. Sub is 0, okay? It's always going to return 0. It's not adding any numbers anymore, okay? So that means if we want to account for this condition, right, that's what the action is. The action represents you need to perform some logic based on some sort of condition, right? There's something that's saying, hey, add or subtract or multiply, whatever you're doing, that action dictates this case. And the case then dictates what happens, okay? So I have a case of add. I'm going to do a case of sub, right? Well, if we match sub, then I would return state minus equals 1, right? Now, those two conditions should be matched. And if we go up and we go down, and that works, right? Now, we could set or we could add another button, maybe another button, and on click, we'll give it another callback for set sum, right? Set sum, and we'll just call it reset. Okay, and we will say reset. Okay, so now I have a callback that's reset. Our default condition is to return 0 anyway. So that means if we increment, decrement, or reset, once again, I don't have any specific logic in here that is stating what to do with reset specifically, but the default condition is like, all right, it wasn't add, it wasn't subtract, poop, I guess it was this other thing, and this is my default. This is what I do when I don't know what to do. When the logic, when your conditions, when a condition isn't available for me to evaluate, or for the switch statement to evaluate, then it must decide what should it do, okay? Right? If we return this, if we got rid of this, let's just say, it's going to scream at us, it's going to still let us increment, still let us decrement, resetting breaks it, right? Resetting removes the value altogether. It didn't know what to do. Let me see, is it screaming at us? It's definitely screaming at us here. Increment, decrement, and then reset. Bloop. Oh, no. Just says undefined. Okay. It says undefined because, once again, we did not return a value. If you don't return something, then that thing is not placed back into sum. Okay? Whatever is returned, this state here represents this value. Okay? So state here is really whatever that value is, right? It's going to monitor that value. And this value is defined by default here, just like the reduce method. Both of them are the same. So really, switches and reduce, the array reduce method, are both being used here. Okay. Well, I suppose also we didn't have to really use switch. We could have used an if-else statement. We could have. But once again, switches, I think, are more intuitive. Switches, when I look at it, it makes it easier to just be like add, subtract. And I know that those are the conditions, right? Instead of something like if action is equal to add, else if action is equal to sub. That's just like, that's a lot of writing. Prone to error. The more you write, the more you're prone to error. This is pretty self-explanatory. And as I kind of read it from top to bottom, I can see what I'm doing here. I can see what I'm looking for here. So it makes it a little bit more intuitive. Okay? Now, we could have, if we wanted to, instead of sending just a value, a specific value, we could have sent maybe an array and said type could be add and maybe a value here. Maybe when we add, we're going to give it a value of 2. Let me see what happens here. What am I doing? Unexpected token, unexpected. Did I miss? Oh, here we go. I'm missing the parens. No, is that not it? No. It should work.
Oh, I see it. It's the ending of the object.
Oh, yeah. That's it. I need to do that. Right? Type, add, comma, value 2. That should be working.
Now you're missing the end of the I
That's,
don't know what to call it. It needs to be ending.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I'm going to give like an Eagle Eye Award. Abner, and you're going to get it. All right.
I see these errors a lot.
Okay. So I'm going to do the same thing, and this time instead of I'll sub and I'll just say value maybe 3. We'll add 2, subtract 3, just for the sake to see that things are changing here. So when I go back up here, action is no longer just a string of text. Action is an object. And because action is an object, we need to elicit the action. Are we doing, what are we doing? Well, action.type. Okay, cool. Action.type is add or subtract, right? Or reset, right? So this would break it all together. Like reset, it's not going to know what to do. It should go to default, or it might break. I don't know. If it's looking for an object and we don't have a value, that might break it. But let's just take a look. So now what I do here, do I just plus equals 1, or do I plus equals action dot value, right? And then here, action dot value. So now what I'm saying is I'm passing it more information instead of just a string of text. I'm telling it how much I want to increment, how much I want to decrement, okay? So if we do this, it still goes up, right? I'm going to start with 0. Let's start with 0. Okay. So I'm going to increment. We should increment by 2. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Decrement. Boop. 7, 4, 1. Okay. Now if I reset, I'm back to 0 because we don't really know what to do. So it just resets. It's not going to scream unless it does. Let me see. Let me just see if it screamed at us if we did the reset. Decrement. Nope. Doesn't scream at us. We have 0 now, and it stays at 0. Okay? That really is kind of useReducer in a nutshell. And really it's meant to, instead of us having separate conditions, right? How would you have approached this if we were just using useState? What would have been your approach? Who wants to jump in? What would we have done?
I mean, it would be very similar, right? Because if you use useState, you don't put the switch statement inside. You would put the switch statement in your setSum or setState function.
Sure. So we could have had a function that ran that logic, right? Or when it was just add or subtract, we could have done something like const add was equal to, right? And then done something like set sum. If we were using use state, right? I could have said set sum and then just, took sum plus equals 1, something like that, right? And then I would have, hey, taken this, had a subtract, right? Subtract method. And instead of adding, I would have subtracted, right? We could have done this also. And then down here, for the event listeners, we would call the add. Then we would call the subtract. You see, at the most basic approach, we probably could have had 3 separate functions that we could have used to manipulate set sum, right? If we were using just use state. 3 separate ones to do the same thing instead of putting our logic in here, which, I mean, Gustavo, you did mention, like, we could have still had, like, one thing that did it also, right? One thing with conditional logic. But at the same time, we could have had these 2 along with the reset one that could have reset it also. So there are different approaches when you're building out your application, right? A lot of the times when we do this, we kind of assign separate methods to execute these click events, okay? But we could have put it in one and then just ran that conditional logic, okay? So useReducer, pretty cool. Pretty cool. It allows you to kind of run your thinking processing. Like, what does the app need to do? And as long as we pass it, in this instance right now, we kind of escalated the functionality, right? Gave it more, the ability to process more bits of information by sending in an object. Because now then the object can just look for a specific key and then look for another key to do something upon versus just sending it a string of text. Okay? Cool. Awesome. All right. It's 9 o'clock. So why don't we take our break? Come back at 9:10, and then we will jump into the lab. Okay. Break time. Break time. Come back at 9:10. Sweet. All right, one more minute. Cool, 9:10. All right, so for the lab, the ultimate goal of the lab is to build something like this. It's pretty basic. Just want to make sure we can wrap our head around useReducer and still building out some components. So I have this kind of light bulb there, and I could turn it off. Turn it on low, medium, or high, right? So I can turn the light to be different degrees of color, okay? And so in the end, we're really just assigning the background color, right? We're just changing the background color. I'm using like RGBA values to change black to be a very solid black to a lighter shade of black. And then those values are associated with this, right? Switch statement, right? Make a switch statement that's like, action dot value is equal to off, right? If it's off, set it to be this thing. If it's low, set it to be this thing, right? So let me slack out the code. Where's Slack here? Here we go. I just slacked out the starter code, okay? So the starter code doesn't really have anything but just the instructions. So your ultimate goal of what you're trying to build is that. Now, what I am going to do here is, here, I can send this out. Here we go. I just want to see if you can actually, I just slacked out this, you know, the interactive solution for it. Can you tell me if you have access to it? No? Doesn't allow you to have access to it? Okay. Well, okay, the only other thing that I want to provide you here, we haven't really gone over setting styles, and we're going to do that next class. And I was going to start with just, you know, basic styles, and then using something, oh, no, not next class, but next week, and then using I forgot it, style components. But for right now, if I was to create a style, this is the light component. You're going to be creating an app, a controls, and a light component. The light component is just responsible for displaying this big circle, right? So I just added a styles object, and I gave it styles like width, height, border, radius. You can see that when you're writing styles in JavaScript, you do them with camel case, not like this. If I was in normal CSS, I would write it like that. But the fact that I'm in JavaScript, I need to do it as camel case, right? So this is the only one that kind of stands out. Everything else looks pretty normal. And you can see here that I'm passing color down to this, and then I'm just applying it. Style is equal to this styles object, okay? It's really all I'm doing here. This light component, pretty basic. You shouldn't really spend a lot of time on the light component. So what I think I'm going to do, just to get everyone started, is, lights. Yeah, I slacked you the lights component, okay? Now it's your job to be able to create the buttons, add the events, do the thing that's going to pass it down. Now, inside of app, I did say, like, here are some of the color schemes. Off, you can set it to be an RGB of 000, comma 1, right? Low, 0.3. There should be 0.3, 0.6, and 0.1, okay? That just lowers the degree of black. So fork.'s the sandbox, import and use reducer in app. Make a controls component that has 4 buttons. And then make a light component that will do the different shades. So now you need to also consider passing state up, right? Lifting state. Because if the controls are what you're clicking, then you need to lift it up to app, and then app needs to pass that value back down to the light component, okay? Questions? Any questions on it? I'll show you the functionality one more time. Right here, right? All right, that's really it. So create a controls with buttons. Those buttons execute a method. Maybe it's a method that gets passed down. Obviously, it has to be a method that gets passed down from app. And whatever that method you want to call it, okay? And it should be responsible for calling useReducer or be the method that useReducer is using. Okay, no questions? Okay, let's get everyone into breakout rooms. Okay, recreate all the breakout rooms. All right, breakout rooms. Okay, recreate them, and boom. You're all in. Okay, once we get everyone back, I'll go over some of the solutions. It is much nicer. A lot has to be said for aesthetic appeal. Right? Cool. So let me go over, I posted in the lab, in the card itself, Lights Lab, I posted 4 solutions. One of them is mine, and then the rest are from everyone else who I slacked and sent me their solution. So I'll take a look at just what I officially put together and then see some other unique solutions to this as well, right? So this was the one that I had put together. Go to Components, go to App, and in App, first thing is created the useReducer, right? Here I'm using a lot of the times what you're going to see is that method called dispatch. It's just semantic naming conventions when it comes to the useReducer and I forget the other tool, but so dispatch is just a word that, or the name of the method. You can call it whatever you want. So I have light, dispatch, useReducer, takes in state, takes in an action. I'm only passing it a very specific action, an action of, off, low, medium, or high. And I'm returning back the whole RGB value for each one of these. And then just default. If there's nothing or it doesn't know what to do, it'll return the default. And I start with it being obviously like really, really dark. Okay. Created some controls right here. So some values that I could pass down to the controls method. And I also pass it this dispatch prop that is passing down this dispatch method. We go to controls. We can see here that in controls, I'm looping over that array and creating buttons. Creating unique buttons based on that, giving them a key, giving them an on-click. This on-click, I created a separate handle click method here that calls props dispatch and passes up whatever the button value is, right? I'm not really passing up the button, I'm passing up the button value. Probably should change that to button value. Right, and then here, I'm just putting all of those buttons. And I'm just using this React fragment here to surround it, because now I have 4 buttons, and instead of putting 4 straight buttons, they need to be wrapped in a parent. Just do that for simplicity's sake. And then I select out the light, and then light would get that particular color. And that was really it, right? So that's, once again, one solution to the problem. Let's take a look at a second solution here. Let's go here. Here it is. Right, this works. Go to app, and app also uses a switch statement, but instead, here's a nice little twist, right? Instead of sending back the whole RGBA values themselves, we're only sending back that kind of opacity value, the A portion of the RGBA. And so here, when we pass it down to color, all we do is pass that down. I kind of think this is a nicer solution, right? It's less typing. I don't have to keep typing RGBA. When I was doing this, I kept mistyping RGB, and it would be RBGA, and it wouldn't work. So doing it once, much cleaner solution, right? I'll go to controls, same thing up, controls here, same thing. We're just looping over these values, mapping, returning buttons, right? On click, props set intensity, and we're sending back that particular setting value right there. A little cleaner. right? Lights, this shouldn't have changed much. Cool. And then we're calling the set intensity. That's what's being called, right? That's where we're passing. We're passing in a value, and it returns. That's another cool solution, right? Let's take a look at this particular solution here. Here, I think the solution before, I think that was Abner's solution. And this one was Ramona's solution. And so you don't always have to use switch statements. How many of you, just show of hands, how many of you did not use a switch statement and just opted for another solution, right? Okay, so you don't always have to use a switch. In this instance here, another unique take on this, we are returning back. We're not doing any sort of condition. We're not like, if it's this, I don't even have to evaluate the condition. If when you click on the button, you actually send me the value that you want, then I'll just return back that value. That's it. It'll be RGB, and then whatever it is, 0.1, 0.3, 0.9, doesn't really matter. There's no need to evaluate at this point in time. And so if we go down to controls, controls here does just that. Controls hard codes and does this, right? Where we're sending back a particular value along with the type, which the type really isn't even being used right now, right? I would say maybe the only drawback to this is instead of using an array of like off, low, medium, and high that allows me to spin up and create buttons using a loop, right? An array of those values that I then loop through to create those. This one I hard coded so that I have to put the value in here, right? If it wasn't this way, then I probably would have opted to do something with an array of values, right? So maybe like let buttons is equal to an array of those things. Do you see? And I could have passed in an array of those values and then still been able to loop over the buttons and create those because I would now have access to the value, right? It's kind of hard coded in the button. And I want to make it a little bit more dynamic. Like I wanted to see if anyone was using or approaching it where you're looping over to create the buttons versus kind of hard coding the buttons, okay? And then I think one last one was, this might be you, Gustavo, right? Yeah, it's definitely yours, okay? Your approach also similar to mine, right? Was you're doing state is equal to, and that's really what it's, all you have to do is really just return the value. It's going to put it into state, right? It'll put it into brightness. You don't have to tell it to put it into state, okay? Same thing with the buttons, hard-coded buttons, okay? And then you have your controls. Oh, you didn't use your controls. You did it.
Haven't done that yet. I was going to add it in.
Okay, that's cool. All right, so you have some solutions to take a look at. If you didn't get it, look through some of those solutions, see which one kind of aligns with your thinking. I kind of like the way of not having to do the evaluating. Just know that useReducer is kind of meant to do that processing. That's really what it's meant for. It's meant to process that information instead of just passing it the value. And you will see it used consistently with switch statements. Cool. Any questions? No? Okay. Yeah, then the only homework that I have, I did have additional bonus things if we got around to it. We definitely didn't get around to it. Do a more reading on useReducer if you want. This guy, I've been reading a lot of his articles lately. Really good material. It's got some training classes and everything. Really, really solid stuff. And then as a bonus read, if you want, reading Intro to Firebase and React. Want to allow you to do something where you can permanently store data using Firebase. Outside of that, just, exit tickets, and we're done. Have any questions? You can always Slack me, okay? Cool. All right. There's exit ticket link, and have a good night, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Got it.
Good night.
Night.